Welcome to Asia Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello from Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka. I'll apologise in advance if this podcast is a bit scrappy, but I'm on the move and a fair bit has been happening. This is a short holiday. I didn't take as much time off over Christmas as I'd hoped to. This trip is outside the scope of national security and international relations, so I won't dwell on Sri Lanka other than to say that this country is a good example of what happens when ethnic and religious hatreds get out of control. And I'm looking at you, Donald Trump, and your latest appalling stunt of posting a video online of Barack and Michelle Obama as apes. I don't know how much coverage that's got in Australia, but it's one of the most disgusting things I have seen from any politician, let alone the President of the United States. By contrast here, various ethnic and religious problems appear to be over, and the nice little country is continuing to heal. And evidence of that was provided in 2023, when millions of Sri Lankans were so fed up with what they regarded as an inept and corrupt government under President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, one of the members of the hideous Rajapaksa family, that the protests were so severe that he and his cronies actually had to flee the country. So good on you, people of Sri Lanka. Now, in the last podcast, I promised to say a few words about the Singapore Air Show, which is where I was all of last week, and I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I'd like to talk about a tiny, quirky bit of Second World War history. You know, it's the sort of obscure thing that sometimes comes up in quiz shows, and that is the story of Japanese soldier Hiroo Onoda. Onoda was a second lieutenant in the intelligence corps, and in certain circles, he is famous because he was the last Japanese soldier to surrender in the Second World War, which he did in 1974. Almost 29 years after the war had actually ended. He hid out in the jungles of the Philippines, living off the land for all that time, killing the occasional civilian. Now, Second Lieutenant Onoda was so convinced of the invincibility of Japan that he refused to accept reality and believed that all of the information about Japan surrendering was enemy propaganda, and he was having absolutely none of it. So I say he kept that up for 29 years, and in fact, once he had been located by a Japanese adventurer, the only way he was finally persuaded to give up was when the Japanese government flew his former commanding officer to the Philippines to order him to surrender. Now, why am I telling you this story? It's because our Defence Minister, Richard Marles, and his total devotion to AUKUS means, I think, he is the spiritual heir of Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda. No matter what evidence he is presented with, he can only continue to bleat and insist that AUKUS is on track, and as I predicted previously, he keeps repeating the phrase used by that racist monster Donald Trump, that everything is going full steam ahead. He was prompted to say this because there was a burst of publicity prompted by yet another report by the Congressional Research Service, which posed a number of scenarios, not for the first time, that's sort of the job of the CRS, about Australia not receiving any Virginia-class submarines, either second-hand or new, and Australia using that money for other capabilities, such as B-21 long-range bombers. Now, the Congressional Research Service is very thorough, very authoritative, and it has excellent contacts in the US government, and so when they produce a report like this, it is taken very, very seriously. It's not the sort of thing that should be dismissed. But again, as I said in a previous podcast, this government has, well, and the coalition will know better, they have no time for think tanks, academia, the media, or the opinions of retired military people. The department has become entirely self-referential, And once they have collectively made up their mind about something, they are not in the slightest bit interested in alternate opinions or alternate views. Anyway, only because the CRS report received a bit of coverage in the media did Minister Marles respond that it is all going wonderfully well when it is not going wonderfully well. Even though I've been in Singapore, I've sort of stayed in touch with colleagues in Australia, and Marcus Hellier, that great analyst of the defence budget, pointed something out to me, and this is a story that I will definitely follow up when I get back. He pointed out that in the latest defence budget update, the figures reveal that 2 billion, that's with a B, billion, of expenditure is being brought forward into this financial year, and of that, an extra 600 million goes to the Australian Submarine Agency for, quote, industrial uplift, unquote, and a few other things. Now, what I can say to Minister Marles, and Minister Pat Conroy is guilty of the same thing, talking about industrial uplift. There's industrial uplift going on in the United States, there's no doubt about that. I believe that industrial uplift is going on in the United Kingdom on the nuclear-powered submarine front. There is no industrial uplift going on in Australia that I can see, apart from thousands of tons of concrete being poured at HMAS Stirling to make that facility ready for the arrival of the first of an ultimate 4 USN Virginia-class submarines to be based there. It's all concrete. I'm not aware of anything else. And you see, there has to be a lot of concrete because nuclear safety requirements mean that your concrete walls basically have to be 10 times thicker than if you're docking a conventional submarine or a conventional warship, because you have to prepare for the possibility, no matter how unlikely, of some sort of major leak of radiation. So that's where the money appears to be going. But defence funding overall hasn't increased. So what this means is that to achieve the government's long-term target of moving from the current 2% of GDP to a mighty 2.3% of GDP for defence expenditure is even further off in the future. Probably now around the year 2065, I would imagine. By the way, Minister Marles, any thoughts about President Donald Trump's racist video? Any comments now about how we have so many, quote, shared equities, unquote, with the US? And I look forward to hearing your views about those. Now, but having mentioned Japan, and now also veering back to the Singapore Air Show, C-3000, the general purpose frigates. Okay, it was an air show. There's very little there about ships, but there was a very large Japanese delegation, and of course, during the course of several days, I had a chat with them, and I learnt that the government of Japan announced, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, advanced funding of, I think, many tens of millions of dollars. I have to go back and look at the documentation when I can find it. Advanced funding to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries for the Australian ships for C-3000. This is sort of to de-risk the project. Let me explain. Japanese companies are new to the defence export game. MHI are very cautious, very wary about taking on too much risk when it comes to Australianising the Megami frigates. They do require some changes. Torpedo helicopter handling systems, I think the helicopter arrangements are slightly different, these sorts of things. Now, the government of Japan has advanced money to MHI so that they can take a deep breath and get on with the job of designing the modifications, and eventually that amount of money will be wrapped up in the amount that Australia ends up paying for the ships. But the government of Japan didn't want to get itself in the position of MHI getting cold feet this early in the process and saying, look, it's all a bit risky. So government of Japan, Ministry of Defence, I assume, has said, don't worry about that. Even in advance of the contract, what we're going to do is we'll give to you what we estimate this work is going to cost, and we will claw it back from the Australians when we negotiate a contract. So what, you might ask? Well, a couple of things. On the positive side, of course, it demonstrates, once again, the enthusiasm of the Japanese government to make all of this happening. The negative side, and get this, apparently, according to my Japanese sources, the Royal Australian Navy was desperate to stop this information getting out. Can you believe that? The Royal Australian Navy tried to block release of information which had already been made public by the government of Japan. Now, if anyone even remotely connected with Ministers Marles or Conroy or Penny Wong hears this, stop this absolute stupidity of obsessive secrecy. The Japanese already privately think you are complete fools, and the longer you continue with this nonsense, the worse it's going to get. It achieves nothing. In fact, it's totally counterproductive. Why are you all obsessed with keeping the details of C-3000 as some sort of top secret project? It's ridiculous. Just knock it off. Oh, okay. Now to the air show. There were no major announcements that I'm aware of. There were a fair bit of activity in the commercial space, but no really earth-shattering military news. But I did learn plenty of interesting things, and in due course I'll convert some of these into written articles. But first, let's do a sort of big picture overview. Megatrends. Or now, what is a megatrend? Class? Any answers? Megatrend. Megatrend is an economic inevitability when certain factors become overwhelming and irreversible. These include things like a move to renewables in the form of wind and solar power and electric vehicles. It's happening. It's inevitable. Stop fighting it. Looking at you again, Mr. Trump. Now, other megatrends, including things like industrialization, once the steam engine had been invented, then electrification, and at the time, hundreds of thousands of candlestick makers protested about the end of their profession. Sorry, guys and girls, it was a megatrend, it was just unstoppable. Or indeed, the horse being replaced by the internal combustion engine. Same thing, huge amount of concern at the time. People were in denial that the horse could ever be fully replaced, but there you go. That's what happened. Now, all of these are megatrends, and they can also be applied to geopolitics. And the current one is that the US is fading out of the high technology defense export market because of the attitude of the Trump government. I've dealt with this in previous podcasts. I'm not going to refer in detail to all of the factors, but clearly they've antagonized the Europeans. The Asians are as nervous as hell. Generally speaking, all of the talk at the show, well, all of the talk in private conversations with me, was about diversification away from the United States, because the US is no longer considered a reliable ally and is no longer considered a reliable supplier of spare parts or equipment. Now, clearly it's not going to happen overnight. It'll take years and years for this to fully play out, and there are a couple of reasons for that. In certain niche areas, the US continues to produce unique products that there's no direct competitor. And the other thing is many countries, including Australia, have huge legacy fleets of US aircraft, and no one in their right mind is going to, overnight scrap all of their F-16s and turn and buy something else from Europe or Korea. That's just financially not realistic. But many nations are actively seeking alternatives, and you can see parts of this starting to flow through. Canada might not go ahead with the full purchase of F-35s. Spain and Portugal have said that they are ruling out F-35s and they're going to look at European solutions instead. This sort of thing is gradually filtering down through the market. Now, that's great news for European suppliers, which explains why their stock prices have, in some cases, tripled in the last year or so, and also very good news for exporting countries like Korea. It would seem that the only country that remains in denial of this megatrend is Australia. Now, this is not yet something that US companies are feeling, not directly. As I say, it will take many years for this to play out. They're still active in the market, but the way that the world is looking, US core commercial interests when it comes to military technology will shrink to the Middle East, to all of the autocracies there, and also the democratic state of Israel, and Australia. That looks to be about it for the US, Middle East and Australia. Again, our politicians are in total denial of this new reality. I do not know why. Hopefully, that is going to change when Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney visits next month. I really hope that it does. Now, a couple of niche things. I'm running out of time and I'm on the verge of travelling to Kandy. I received, courtesy of Boeing, a very comprehensive update on the Apache helicopters. I've had a bit to say in the past about the purchase of those. I'm not going to relitigate all of those issues. That's ancient history. What is clear to me from a very comprehensive briefing is that the US Army has a very solid growth path coming up for their helicopters. Over the years, you're going to be hearing a lot more about LEs. That's the abbreviation of launched effects. The US has started flying in sort of an experimental configuration, Apaches carrying pods of launched effects, which can be anything from guided munitions to drones carrying sensors with information being linked back to the Apache. They have also been conducting highly successful missions using Apaches to down drones. They've been carrying out live fire exercises, and the Apaches are proving to be extremely effective in the counter-drone role, either using large missiles, laser-guided rockets, or the 30mm cannon. So that will be a future story for APDR. Now, I would assume, maybe I shouldn't assume anything, that the Australian Army is watching those US developments very closely. If they are, Australia will hopefully be a beneficiary of the investment that the US Army is making. Let's just keep our fingers crossed on that. But also on the helicopter thing, I received in passing an update on the NH-90 family of helicopters. And as much as I'm tempted to rub, or continue to rub, Army's nose in it, I won't in this episode. But Australia, having destroyed our 46 Taipan helicopters, the consortium producing them assures me that they are still in full rate production, and helicopter number 634 has just rolled off the production line. There's an enormous growth path for those helicopters, but what did we do? We turned them into scrap rather than donating them to Ukraine. Okay, people probably get irritated with me referring to that so frequently, but it was the air show. I did get a briefing, and so I just have to mention it. All right, as I mentioned, I am on holiday. I'm going to have a 1-week break because next weekend I know I'm in transit and it'll just take me a couple of days to get organised, so there'll be a 1-week pause, then things will resume. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye for now, and I'll record the next one from home.
That's today's Asia Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.